So as I'm sitting here, guys, I'm just contemplating all the mistakes that I made this past 5 days, I would say. And I'm thinking to myself, I could either keep this to myself or I could share this with the group. And I think that it would be most responsible for me to at least share all the mistakes that I made and what you shouldn't do. And particularly how I didn't follow my instincts, or I should say my trading strategies, right? I have a set trading strategy that I follow. And knowing damn well that if I would have just stuck with my original plan, I wouldn't be in the situation that I'm in. All right. So let me just show you guys all the entries and exits that I had with Algorand. And home particularly, if I would have just stuck with those trading strategies, it would have worked out fine, right? So let me start from the beginning where I first entered into Algo and and the mistakes that I made, right? So initially, when I had entered into Algorand, it was back down here, right? It was around that 30 cent range. And I did phenomenal well, right? I had a nice entry. It had propped up, and I sold some spots here, right? So my first initial gain was right here. I had made over 22%. And so far we're doing good, right? 22% up. It's great. And then I had sold it there. Oh, technically I sold half of it and I had rebought down here, right? And so then it had shot up the next morning. And then I had initially sold it off at around 38. Once again, right? Because double top, whatever. It's part of my trading strategy, right? When something is at its resistance, I sell. And even if it did end up going higher, which it did end up pushing up higher, it's fine because I still stuck with my trading strategy. And so that's lesson number one. Regardless of how the market turns out, right? Whether it keeps going up, always stick to your trading strategy. So this was fine, right? Even though it did end up going higher, it's fine because I did trust my instincts and I sold at resistance. Okay, cool. Well, like I said before, it does end up pushing up higher, right? It pushed up over 10%. Great, whatever. So what I ended up doing was waiting for the next consolidation, which was around this general area. You guys can see, right? It was wedging out. The reason I bought higher was because we were still technically uptrending, which is great, right? When you're still uptrending and it starts flagging out, that always signifies that it's going to keep pushing higher, right? So again, that's still part of my trading strategies, regardless even if I had sold lower. So never be discouraged to buy higher as long as it's still trending upwards. That's like lesson number 2. So anyways, I had initially bought in, which was around 41.20, I believe. So around this general area. As you guys can see, right, it's still pushed higher. Did I sell here? No, I did not actually. In reality, I probably should have sold around this general vicinity. But what I am doing, and this is probably where I first made my first real mistake, all right, was at the moment I broke that trend line, instead of selling at this general vicinity, I had bought in more actually around that 4,400 range, this area. And the problem with that was that we had already broken this trend line. And I always say, once we break trend lines, they usually enact as resistance areas. You can see that right here. We try to break out. Of course, we didn't. So then I'm going lower. And so what that ended up doing was actually pushing my average, right? So my average was initially 41.20. It actually ended up pushing it down towards around 4,200 or so. So now, any single time it dipped below to 4,100 or whatever, I was actually in the negative, technically speaking, right, for my last entry. And so what that caused me internally to do was to be a little bit more on the edge, right? And so any single time it dipped below, I'd pray that it wouldn't go lower, which is a bad idea to do. You never want to just be hopeful, which is, again, another trading goes against my trading strategy. Well, luckily for me though, it still ended up holding this general support area. right? Which is bad because you never want to prey on luck. But it did end up wedging out and continuously wedge out for an extended period of time here, to the point where it finally ended up breaking out. And let me tell you right now, this is where things get really bad, okay? And let me explain why. So let's zoom out on the 4 hourly. So I'm always very cautious on the markets, right? I'm always watching the markets 24/7. I'm always watching every single time frame, trying to analyze everything from a different perspective, just so I can get a different point of view. And one in particular thing that I should have noticed right away was that this was a higher high, but the RSI was printing bearish divergence. And let me tell you right now, guys, I saw this. All right, I saw this thing. It wasn't like it passed me by, that it caught me off guard. No, I definitely saw it, right? Like I said before, I'm always watching the markets. But what I decided to do was I told myself, well, this coin could possibly still have a lot more upside. It had technically broken out of this previous high, whatever, and it could still continue to push up, which is a bad idea, right? Because I know deep down when you see something like that with bearish divergence, you want to sell, all right? Even on the daily, right? If you actually zoomed out on the daily, the divergence was even worse. Like, it was ridiculous, all right? I mean, look at that. We had pushed higher, but the RSI down here was way down here, right? So it was printing very bad bearish divergence. Okay, so here's what happened, right? Let's continue on. So, and this is where things get really ugly, guys. And again, this is just me being transparent as possible because, I want you guys to learn from my mistakes. But instead of, again, selling it off its, broken resistance trend line, right? You always want to draw trend lines for this reason. And looking at that resistance, I decided to ignore it, which is a bad idea, and just hold on to it. And the thing is, it's like, okay, well, it broke down, right? Once it breaks down like that, your initial reaction is to sell it because, right, bearish divergence, it broke down, obviously didn't break higher, was to ignore that. I don't know why I ignored it, but I did, okay? And you're probably thinking to yourself, well, you probably sold here around 4,400, right? No, I did not. I did not. And if you ask me why, honestly, I don't know why. I really don't. It's weird, sometimes I get in these weird moods, and I think this is part of just being human, where I just ignore things. I don't know why, but I just do. And so the market ended up actually going down quite a bit, actually. And I didn't actually end up selling until 3,900. So technically speaking, right, if we do the math, I was up from 29% up. I was around 30%. I was up 30%. Okay. And then I did end up buying higher here, more or less. So technically, because I ended up selling half of it for about a 10%. So technically, let's add on an extra 5%. So all in all, I was actually up around, let me adjust this really quickly. So I was up around 35%. All right, let's say 35%. And technically, I had an average around 4,200, right around this area, right? And when I had breaking out, I was technically up around an extra 15%. But because I didn't sell it, I was technically down actually 10%. So now my average was actually around 25% now because I had lost all of this momentum that I had gained. So the only thing that was really keeping me afloat now was my original entry, because I had waited until things had bottomed out and it had rebounded, right? And I sold it around 3,900. Okay, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, I guess it's not too bad. You're still up 25%, which is true. But already, that had already put a damper in my mood, right? I'm already in a bad situation. And when that happens, you typically don't want to, you want to take a few days off. You want to take a break because at this point, your general mindset is, okay, I need to make that money back, whatever. So anyways, I had waited a couple days, and then I had noticed that this trend line, I mean this wedge had narrowed down to crazy, to the point where, it was tight. It was nice and tight, which was, in my opinion, this was half luck and I'd say half luck. And here's why I'm saying this, guys, because initially when I had bought this, I bought it at 32.90. This was my entry right here, which is technically speaking right at resistance. And the only reason I had even thought about buying this was because the 5-minute chart was printing a breakout for the first time ever. And technically, we had already breaking out several times. So for the fact that I had bought in here and it had actually managed to break out was honestly pure luck. Looking back at it, that's actually not a good idea for me to buy on resistance. If anything, I should have bought at its lower support leg, right? That way, if it were to break down, at least I could cut my losses or whatever. But instead, I ended up buying resistance, which is not a good idea. But luckily for me, right, it ended up breaking out. Cool. And so now, we had formulated another trend line. Okay. So at this point, I'm looking at this. I'm like, okay, we're technically sitting above the hourly support, whatever. It's wedging out here. So technically things are still looking good regardless. And so we're still pushing up, pushing higher. But what I did notice is that now we're at this green line resistance. Okay. Which is not a good thing. And so your initial instincts is right? When you look at this, right, you see a bunch of those sell-offs, right? That's those resistances, especially at its previous neckline. You want to sell at that point, right? You'd think that I would sell. But again, I'm still kind of struggling from this previous, I'm still trying to make it up for it, right? I'm thinking to myself, oh, well, I have a nice average and I have a nice entry or whatever. So I'm expecting this to explode, right, towards the upside for some reason. But what I should have actually noticed was that the trend line right here had broken. We had technically broken this uptrend, which is what I told myself. I literally told myself, I'm like, hey, the moment it breaks this trend line, you sell it, right? And we did end up getting a sell off here towards its previous support. And we did end up getting a bounce. And so my initial reaction was that during this general area right here, I should have actually sold it, because now, we are on resistance, and you can see it on the 15-minute chart, right? The 15-minute EMAs are showing resistance all the way through, right? And once again, did I sell it? No. Why? I couldn't tell you, to be honest. Okay. That's also another, like, half of these mistakes that I'm making, I haven't made in a long time. And I'll honestly probably explain here at the very end why I probably didn't sell it and why it's, it's crazy, for me to even like be in the situation. But okay, so I didn't sell it here. And so all this time, I'm thinking, well, we're technically near support. It's going to bounce. And it didn't. In fact, it didn't just when the moment it broke down, actually, it just things kept going down and down. And so it wasn't until we ended up breaking this support right here, this last support, that I said, all right, I'm finally going to sell it, right? So what I'm saying is that I am selling it around 34.60, whatever, okay? At this point, I'm just trying to sell, because things are just trending downwards like crazy, whatever. And so, things are still going down, right? And so I'm seeing this huge wick right here, right? Technically, again, this is all going against my rule, because things are still trending downwards. And I always tell myself, do not buy when things are trending downwards like this. Just wait till we have breakout confirmations, right? Like the way we have back here or right here. And at this point, we've broken pretty much any major supports. So there's no reason for me to technically be buying this until we, break above. But for some reason, I end up buying back around 31.20. Okay. And again, we'll do some maths to see how far down I'm actually am from my original entry to now. But as you guys can see, right, and this was yesterday, as of right now, and I'm down over 20% from this entry right now. which technically shouldn't have happened, right? Because Bitcoin is still technically necking, being still trending downwards. And with the moment I sold right here, I shouldn't have gone back in until we had a break above its trend line, which we haven't, as we speak. So basically, to kind of conclude here is, let's actually do the math, right? Let's do the math. Okay, so we established right here that, I had technically only made around 25% throughout this entire move, right? 25%, because I lost that 10% here, whatever. And technically you're saying to yourself, well, Edward, you technically had made, right, from my initial entry around 32.90, and I sold it around 34.66. So I had an extra 5%, I'm sorry. And then if you add that to the 25%, that's 30%. And so now, if you're looking at the original entry from 35% all the way down, guys, I'm technically up from this entire time. I'm only up 10% as we speak, right? If the market continues to go down like the way it's been going, it'll get worse, because at this point, the only reason I even haven't bothered to sell from that last entry was because things are like ridiculously at this point just going stupid, right? Like if there's one thing that I've learned is that even after something ends up seeing a huge sell-off after a while, was that eventually it will end up rebounding. And that's kind of like again, this is why it's never important to never be hopeful, right? I mean, look, this is a pretty good example here, right? We had a huge sell-off, and eventually it did end up bouncing. And so at this point in time, it's almost become like a hodl in some circumstance for me to just be hopeful that things end up actually bouncing off of it. And so my plan for the time being is that eventually, whenever this bounces, whenever that will be, right? I don't know, that, we end up touching that resistance line, and I would sell it maybe at that break even trend line. Who knows, right? 3,100, 30 cents. I don't know. But more of the story, guys, right, is that from being up nearly 40 to 50% on this, not trusting my instincts, not compounding it, I end up putting myself in a bad situation now where things are just going down and down and down. And instead of being up like crazy, I'm struggling to, at this point, I'm basically at a point where I'm breaking even. And things wouldn't be in this situation if I would have, again, trusted my instincts initially. If I didn't, if I didn't end up FOMOing back into some wicks, right? If I would have just waited for confirmation, and if I would have just sold when I need to sell, right? When we saw those breaks and trend lines. And let me tell you guys again why, at the end of the day, why I didn't do this, why I didn't do any of that actually, was because for some reason, I guess throughout this entire run up, right, that we've had with altcoins, Bitcoin, and whatever these past few weeks, I resorted back towards this FOMO or something. I had resorted back towards, initially, things going parabolic once again, like they did back in the day. And for some reason, I thought maybe, right, if I zoom out and things, start to look better, it'll consolidate. We continue to push up and we hit that $2 mark. But if I would have just paid attention towards those little cues, especially like on the, smaller time frames, like 4 hourlies or whatever, I wouldn't be in the situation that I am right now. Because I would have sold off when I needed to sell. So, I mean, you guys can judge me right now for all you guys want, honestly. Or you guys can, but I don't know. I'll explain it. But so this just hasn't been a great day. This hasn't been a great week because I've been losing like crazy. I think because like I always say, even if I didn't necessarily lose money from my initial entry, or at least at this point, I probably might as well. I'm still losing a lot of opportunity costs, guys. I mean, this was from February 17th to the 9th, right? This is a whole good, like, 20 days that I've lost just continuous money, when I definitely shouldn't be in the situation. So yeah, things are looking a little rough, but here's one thing that I've learned, is that eventually things do end up bouncing off of it. And especially when things go this parabolic down towards the downside, eventually we do end up getting a relief or whatever. And at this point, you know, that's just what all I want, just a relief off these lows or whatever. But again, this is just me explaining things. I know this isn't like a cheerful video or anything, but this is just me, guys, explaining why you should always trust those trend lines and your instincts and to sell and to pull the trigger. Because reasons like this in the market, you know, especially when it necks this hard and continuously necks this hard, it just reminds you, you know, how bad things can get in a very short period of time. I mean, really, if you think about it, you know, the reason, you know, it's been doing this only in 3 days time, right? It took only 3 days, you know, for this to just completely wipe out. And so if you're not continuously watching the charts or you're not continuously selling when you need to be, you know, you can lose things very, very quickly, right? So, you know, so that's why I have a set up trading strategy, you know, to prevent things like this. But I didn't pull the triggers on time, so I got stuck in this little rut. So I don't know, guys. So I hope you guys can learn from my mistakes. This is why I'm doing this video, because, you know, it's important. You know, if I make these mistakes, I want you guys to avoid them for that reason. So yeah, I guess I'll end it here.